Good morning, everybody. Hello. Really nice that this worked out, that we can be here physically in one space. Welcome to a Tree to Product. It's like a workshop that's happening as a collaboration of like within the Center of Excellence here. And but it's a collaboration between the Digitized Wood people, like which is Moritz, Julia, and like me, who is guest professor for this semester here at Uni Stuttgart. And I'm super happy that I could come. It was like a really big question with Corona, and I think it was also a big question that this can happen. And it's the first meeting that like the Digitized Wood network has, which is actually physical. I mean, you started.
Not
right?
really.
Not really.
Maybe I can jump in. So we had one in Baden last year, but now it's the first time we have a physical event here at the university directly at the campus, Stadtmitte. And we realized that there's a lot of things with the administrative stuff. It's kind of complicated, so it was kind of interesting, and I hope it will work out. And I'm happy that so many guests are joining. And yeah, thanks for coming, and also for from Jan Bulmer. He was, I think, the last candidate who joined, because we have also requested some from the forestry industry, and because we were very late, so the most of them said there's another guy here who also were late, but still before Jan Bulmer, and we're happy that you both are here. But we also requested for the guests other people, but just for the time, it wasn't, it doesn't work out.
It's a big shift from virtual world, where any meeting is possible, to physical world, where you need to travel and be there, etc. But there are certain qualities in physical meetings, like coffee breaks and abilities to eat together and mingle in a very different way. So that's why I think like it's really good to have this here. And like the idea of today's meeting is actually to bring together people from forestry sector with people from like research in architecture, engineering, and other timber related fields. We don't make a round of intros. I think there are too many people here today, but I think we introduced us now. I'm going to introduce a bit like the day, which is really like the kind of based on the like on the shift and reception of the materials that we're working in. Like it's very interesting for, at least for me, in our research practice, to see that we at the Center for IT and Architecture in Copenhagen have been working since 2006 with materials, but we always took the materials from the shelf, and we know how they are made, but we don't know really like the environment where they are made in. Not really, we know producer, but we don't know the pre-producers, etc. And especially with like a resource as timber, this is really astonishing that like our fields of the forestry sector, or silviculture and architecture and building culture are so interwoven, and still there's like this kind of divide at the sawmill which we hardly cross. And so like this is a bit the idea of like today. All right, so now I need to kind of figure out how this works here. But it also becomes obviously very crucial, like at this moment of time, where we kind of understand that resource is nothing which is always and readily globally available, which is like the outset of a lot of the industrialization that we are encountering. So the resource is for sure also something that like has to be resourced in kind of aspects of like sustainability and like resource handling. Like the idea that like our planet has like boundaries, like its limited resource, is something which is very aware, like very present in all our discussions. But I think the practical impact of this is just emerging now these days. So building sector is kind of large, like the quantities of material that are going into any building is enormous. So when in our collaboration we work a lot with other like researchers who do, for instance, bioplastics or something like that, and when we talk about the quantities that we put in just one column, they're always astonished, like how much that is. And so it is like building is about building cheap and not much, but it also comes, they've been very comfortably setting on a very specific set of highly engineered materials, and those are also running out, and like it's now from sheep and like a move from having like sheep mass-produced stock to something which is more intelligent resource and way more local than like the global practice that we have created in industrialization. This comes also with like problems of like the linearity of all our material flows. So like the idea that things are going from kind of like the forest into the bin is probably kind of ending out, and we are in a world where circularity is, yeah, it's like necessary, but also very, very difficult. We come from Copenhagen here, from Switzerland, my postdoc, where kind of circularity is probably as same as here, it's like implemented there. There's really a lot of move towards this, but like then when you look at like the kind of aims that we have and the reality where we are, and we need to get better. And maybe this seminar can help to understand it. So like one move in this idea, or like in this circularity, move towards the circularity, is to move from kind of the materials that we are used to, like concrete, steel, or stone, to kind of the world of like the renewables, like the growing and the regenerative materials. And I think all of us are completely inscribed in this move, and we are all very, very happy to work more with timber or with kind of regrowing materials like flax or others. But also with those materials, there comes for sure also like a shift, right? So like every biomaterial has inherently a temporality. It is going to decay at some point in some conditions. And although a timber can become thousands of years old, most of them don't. Whereas like any of the pyramids in Egypt is still standing. So there's a shift in like in the ideal of like what architecture is, like from something which is everlasting and low maintenance to something which is more engaged and eventually also decaying, and it needs to be replaced. So like this conceptualization is something that we at CITA are inherently interested in, and like our idea here about like the what materials is that they are in the future, they are harvested, they are designed, so they are made and they're composed, and they are eventually also living. If you look at the research in mycelium and other biodesign parts. So timber is something which we are all familiar with. It's like thousands of years old. They have like, it's deeply ingrained in most cultures in this world. However, it's also very different in every culture how it has been used, and it's very dependent, or has been very dependent on the local environment and the timber which is around traditionally. Like today, this is kind of different, and there's a renewed interest in like large timber buildings, and like it's seen as like the kind of like saving of all carbon problems, and like there's like initiatives all over the place to kind of use it because it's like renewable, recyclable, energy efficient, and it's also like a carbon sink, which maybe you can read when I move myself inside. So there's new possibilities, like in glulam and CLT. It's nothing which is extremely new, but it's new in its use. We've been up to Skellefteå last week, and we've slept in a timber hotel, 20-story high CLT building, and I have to say I'm really amazed. It's a really nice building, it's a really good architecture, and it's a really different atmosphere than most of the buildings that we are currently in. So there's an architectural opportunity and a material opportunity that we want to talk today. However, the question then we have also, like, so if we have this, how do we understand this material? Is it just like a plug-in where we replace one material that we have been using for a long time, like concrete plate, with another material, CLT? Is it so easy, or do we need to reconsider our practice more in depth? So that's something to discuss today, and especially through a material lens, where I think like you might show a bit of this, like where we are kind of focusing in the timber that we're actually using on a very few species. So it's all like spruce or similar material, all the material which are growing or which are coming up more, like with climate changes, are not in our palette. So how do we extend the use like into other species, and how do we have better understanding of it than to make everything species? It's also like the idea that like today timber is understood as a homogeneous resource, so we are very good in classifying and grading timber, but mainly it is downgrading. So if there's a batch of timber then we take the weakest of those and say this is kind of the quality. I might be a bit wrong, and like you might probably polemic here. There's also a problem with like how we use the resource. So in the work that Tom has done in his PhD, we're very astonished when you build like with, for instance, glue lamps, how much of the material is kind of waste or it's not becoming a building element. It's like in double curved glue lamp beams is up to 85% of material that we cut away from the original tree to kind of the building product. And that's really a lot of material that's not becoming a carbon sink. And this is a problem because like this is wasteful undertaking, and biomass is a limited resource, so we shouldn't waste too much material. We should use more efficiently, but we should also be aware that like the building sector is not the only one who is looking at timber as a resource. So any industry which is moving from kind of like their petrol-based products into a bio-based product will come along cellulose, and there's a lot of pressure, at least in like the Scandinavian context where we are, to kind of use material like or kind of get like the fiber material out of the forest. So like this has impact on availability, which anybody who's building a house at the moment painfully notices, and which kind of then questions like how our business models with timber are. So there's also an impact on like how much we are cutting and where. So there's been this Nature paper 2 years ago, which was kind of mind-blowing, where they've been using satellite imagery to kind of see, okay, how much is harvested every year, and what is the age of the kind of regrowing trees, and then figuring out that like this comes from a LCA or carbon perspective here, and so then they figured out that actually their models don't work anymore so well because like a younger forest stores less carbon, so we have more young forest, meaning that like we cannot store as much carbon as we take on into our models. So, and then for sure also the realization that like a forest is not just there for harvesting timber, but it's actually like a place where many other animals, but also humans live. In Sweden, there's a really large discussion about this because like the clear cutting and other practices are taking away like the forest where people actually living in, there's culture there. And well, this is an area of conflict, and we obviously the forestry sector is shifting there in like or the kind of the societal view on the forestry sector is shifting. However, the good news is that actually like there is not too much timber going into buildings, and like there are many others who actually are taking like or living or using like the forestry products. So this is 4% is something that I found in a 2018 report. I'm not completely sure whether this is true. Like it sounds very little, but it is true that like most of the material is used is becoming other products than timber products, and like as buildings are like the kind of storage of carbon, it might be good to increase this number. This is happening all over the place. So like this is the context that we in Denmark are in, where there's been a massive investment into new timber production facilities, and sawmills, CITA factories, and the whole chain there. And there are like real aims to increase the amount of timber buildings in a really large amount. Similar here in Baden-Württemberg or in Germany, where Billmann will talk more about like Holzbau offensive, where kind of like the idea is like how do we up this? And it's interesting that this kind of links into the field that where most of us come from field of computation and architecture, and digitalization is one of the key modes to actually like introduce more of the use of timber into the sector. This is something that we have been working with a lot, and like where the whole building industry has been going through a process of digitalization. So coming more to the topic of the day, where we in the sector have, for instance, in the inner chain network, looking at, like, together with our partners at ITKE and companies from the engineering and construction industry, to see how what are the flows of data, the flows of ideas and concepts within the building sector. So here, Tom's PhD is like a prototypical example, like being us as a research institution at the CITA, and then people who are very early on creating data in the competition phase at White Architects, and the ones who are actually building the buildings at Bluma Lima. What is the data flow from there to the construction site? How are they influencing? Can be feedback loop who like make the data flows better and increase the knowledge. So digitalization is the idea of a constant data flow from the early stage research, early stage design to the actually assembly and use. And so here, linking those two is the concept of like our field. It's digitalization. This is like our name. It's a shame that everybody who's here in the IntCDC knows this. It's a similar expression of like how actually like all those data and all those actors are linked together through like a digital data chain. And so where this is like the field of the building sector, has a lot of problems. It's not yet done, etc. But like we find something similar in like the wood forestry sector. So like this idea of like a chain of different actors, different acts, has been conceptualized early on. This is a paper from 1992, and for sure then this comes along with the digitalization of the forestry sector. So this is where we want to get some insights today and understanding, okay, so what are those different parts here in this forestry wood production chain, how they are becoming digital, and what are the interest here. So like this is some views that we have, for people that we came along on the way. So for instance, people who look at the forest from a satellite or terrestrial data to assess what type of timber is here, how is it growing, what is like the age, etc. We will hear more about this. And next step of harvesting, which is also like under like a lot of interest of digitalization, where autonomous harvesting might be the far future, but like there's a lot of support in like what timber are we actually cutting and when on the machines itself. Then moving on to like the sawmills, where, for instance, like computer vision or CT scanning is like implemented to track and follow the elements, but also to take decision about cutting patterns to increase yield, but also to find specific parts. And we'll see a bit more of this. And so the idea here, the problem or what's happening though here is that at this moment of time, any of those data is lost, it's cut. And so as we observe it, then like all the data which has been collected from the forest over the tree to the individual element becomes like a standardized product. So this is like a situation today where the tree becomes like standard products, and the question is for today is what would be a future really link the idea of the forest wood production chain and the data that is gathered here, the knowledge and sensitivities with the digital chain and the building sector. So how can we create a link? What are the benefits there if we no longer go from a tree to a classified product, but a tree to the building product, the building element? Right? We're going to see, besides like the part of the forestry, like examples of research and actually products which look into this, like here from CITA and ICT. And like the idea there is maybe the renaissance or an idea of like the forest, to understand the forest as a resource. So this is the vision, or maybe the dream of the day today, where we go back from seeing this as a product we take from the shelf, but actually something like where we go into the forest as people like done in the very old days, investigate the trees and use those trees specifically for how they are grown or how the properties are. So this is a very old idea which has maybe a renaissance today through digitalization. Without Mate here, I would like invite the first speaker. So, yeah.